I am really, really glad that we're all together tonight. After a week like this, we needed it. We really, really needed this. I am glad to be here with those who are here in Greensboro at Temple Emmanuel. I'm glad to be with those of you who are checking us from wherever around the country, around the world, maybe even some of those from Israel. I am so glad that we are together. If you asked me last Shabbat what it was that I was going to talk about this Friday night, the simple answer would be Shavuot, right? Sunday night begins the day on which we mark the giving and the receiving of Torah at Mount Sinai. Perfect thing to talk about this time of the year. We should be focused on that, but we're not. On Monday, right around noon, I got an email from one of my oldest and closest friends. A friend who not long ago, during these COVID days, realized his life's dream of moving to Israel. He made Aliyah. And the subject of the email went like this: Zoom chat and missile fire. And the content of his email: so I was on a Zoom call with 100 people from a Hadassah group in Maryland, too busy to note that Hamas was aiming rocket fire at my home. Probably better that way. Not the type of email you expect to receive, not the type of email you'd ever want to write. Many of you also know that Michal, my wife, is in Israel right now, visiting back home with her parents, whom she has not seen since before COVID. It was a good time to go, vaccinated. Israel was doing great. Get home and see the family. By the way, she and the whole family are safe right now. Michal and I have been talking as often as we can since Monday. She sends her love. If she were not in Israel, I'm sure that she too would be here tonight. Because that's what we do. When there are challenges, we Jews get together with each other. We're limited in the number of people that we can have tonight here for services. And if this weren't the case, many more would be with us, wouldn't they? This is where we come to our temple in times of happiness, but also in times of challenge. And we, of course, are grateful to all who have joined us digitally tonight or who will be watching these services later. Sadly, this is not the first Shabbat that we have spent when Israel is under fire. And I should say this also, that these moments happen far too frequently. They are unacceptable. So right now, take a look to the person sitting to your left if you've got people sitting to your left, or take a look at people sitting to your right if you have people sitting to your right. That person, even if you won't be hugging that person later, that person is here for you, to give you strength, to give you koach, to bring you comfort, a taste of what we call nechama, and to lift you up, because we all need a bit of an aliyah at this point. And together we can do what Rabbi Gutman said just a moment ago. We can send the message to our family, our friends, and everyone that we know, anyone who feels connected to Israel or anyone who is in Israel. But this isn't about us. But we care. We care about you. We have your back. And you are not alone. It's at times like these that I also feel the weight of the poetic words that were written in medieval Spain, pre-Columbian times, by Yehuda Halevi. He wrote these words, Libi b'misrach va'anochi b'sof ha'ma'arav. My heart is in the east, even though I'm stuck here in the farthest part of the west. I added the stuck in part. I wish I were there. Maybe you do too. Strange as that sounds. Because it really sticks out that today, May the 14th of 2021, is on the civil calendar exactly 73 years after the day that David Ben-Gurion stood up on that Shabbat afternoon and declared that the Jews had returned home, declared our independence, declared Israel's independence. Some of us were in the neighborhood, Zev. Much has changed since then. Israel is now able to mount a defense that wasn't certain in 1948. But much is still the same. We all know that the Middle East is a very unstable region. It's a tinderbox on the brink of exploding at any time. And this is especially true when you focus on Israel and its immediate neighbors. And this time, well, Murphy's Law. You've heard the list. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and that law prevailed. It should not come as a surprise to anyone that Israel is not perfect. No country is. But the main aggressor in this moment is the extremist terrorist group Hamas. They run the Gaza Strip, and they have now increased in popularity in the West Bank, and let's call Hamas what they are. They are the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, a radical group recognized as such not by those who wish to be Islamophobes, and I'm not one, but by Muslim countries. And their funding comes from Iran and from others wishing to foment unrest, Hamas. Their mission and their aims are spelled out in their charter, which was written in the late 1980s. You can still find this published anywhere, especially on the internet. It is highly anti-Semitic, and if you thought QAnon was bad, you should see the language in this and how unbelievably problematic it is. Hamas. Anti-Semitic and triumphalist. They seek to be the sole leaders of the Palestinian people, and they will exploit any opportunity to do so, and they have done so cynically this time. You know their stated aim is to destroy Israel. They are the exclusive leadership of the Gaza Strip, and claiming that Gaza is occupied by Israel is ridiculous. It plays on the collective amnesia of most of the world. Israel used to rule Gaza, but it withdrew completely from Gaza in the fall of 2005. And just as a reminder, the Palestinians held elections in 2006. That was the last time that they held any elections. Hamas won a majority of votes, but not enough to form a government. So what did they do? They pulled off a coup in 2007, violently wresting control from their partners in the Palestinian Authority. What started as a downhill descent, with the infrastructure left by Israel set aflame, only worsened as Hamas routinely sent rockets into nearby bedroom communities in Israel. They built underground tunnels. They threatened to attack civilians living in Israel, and they successfully took soldiers hostage, including Gilad Shalit, whose picture sat over there for the years that he was in captivity. Like many terror groups, Hamas thrives on fear, terror, chaos, and sows uncertainty. Many feel that Hamas's first and subsequent barrage of missiles, nowadays in 2021, played the Arab street within Israel and the Palestinians' territories artfully. Commentary in the Hebrew press rightly noted, and I'll translate here, that this time the war is not against Israel. It's against the Palestinian Authority. Hamas is working to undermine Fatah, the long-standing Palestinian leadership, and their base in Jerusalem and also the West Bank. And if they could rule there as a theocracy, they would. Remember, though, that Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, is now in the 16th year of his 4-year term. Let that sink in for a second. That's who Hamas is fighting against. Prior to Hamas's missile attacks, he canceled Palestinian elections because he knew that he was losing votes to Hamas. Their presence has only increased now. So friends, what has been the result of what's taken place since Monday? I can just go through some of the things. As of this afternoon, as you heard from Rabbi Gutman, Hamas has fired over 2,200 rockets into civilian areas in Israel. These were once rudimentary armaments. They are now much more sophisticated. Israel, in turn, as we might expect, has defended itself, carried out hundreds of airstrikes against military targets exclusively in Gaza. Last count that I heard, there were 70 dead in Gaza, including, and it breaks our hearts, 16 children. Among the dead are 6 members of Hamas's high military command, including the head of Hamas's military projects, their missile projects. And at last count, and I may be off now, there were 7 Israelis killed, including 2 children. It was Allison Kaplan Summers. She mournfully described on this week's episode of the Promise podcast as follows. Unfortunately, by the time you listen to this, she said, more Gazans will be dead and injured, more Israelis will be dead and injured, more people will have been threatened, beaten, and pelted with rocks, more shop windows will be smashed, more kids will have been snatched from their beds in the middle of the night by parents hoping to bring them somewhere safer before the missiles fall or the planes come. And to add to this, it's broken our hearts to watch the civil unrest and violence on the streets of Israel, especially in towns known as towns that have been places of coexistence, that have both Jewish and Arab concentrations. Political and communal leaders within Israel, and I should say this, right and left, Jewish and Arab, are condemning those in their own communities who are carrying out the violence. They're calling for the attacks to stop, as gangs in some cases have been going around the streets. It's scary. Michal sent me a note from her high school. She's an alum of the elite Hebrew University High School. It's prided itself on being a center where Jews and Arabs have studied together for as long as anyone can remember. That note to alumni said that the school and its alumni are ready to do everything to make sure that all who attend school and beyond are welcome, uplifted, and protected. I'll quote from that, translated into English: do not allow fear to awaken or justify hatred, racism, or violence. And those calls are coming from throughout Israeli society, right and left, Arab and Jewish. Friends, we are thousands of miles away, here in little old Greensboro, but our hearts are there. They are in Israel. Libi b'Mizrach. Now, we Jews were a people of action. And so it's at times like this that we ask the question, what is it that we can do? None of us can negotiate peace. None of us needs to be out there saying these things. We can't negotiate peace. That has to be done by the parties themselves. They are the ones who have to live with one another and the consequences of their decisions. But I do suggest that we do the following. First, many of us feel a need to know more. Where is that background sheet that kind of unpacks for us everything that's happening? We seem to be hearing one thing on the media, but something else there, and then you open up Facebook or whatever you're getting, the social media, and tonight here in Temple, you should have received a handout. And we'll post this to our Facebook page. I'm most grateful to Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt. He compiled these resources, and they are outstanding. They are quite helpful for those who have followed Israel for decades, as some of us have, as well as those of us who are newer to the conversation. Follow up on them. Just because Hamas wants to win over the hearts and minds of those who it seeks to control doesn't mean that we or those that we know have to follow suit. Nor does it mean that we have to be silent as others marginalize Israel, spread misleading accusations, inaccurate analogies, and bad analysis. Rabbi Gutman and I, by the way, we're here for you. Earlier in this week, we had a schmooze, and you can find this. It's a great briefing on the Temple Facebook page, where we talked with Tom Sawicki, where we had Rabbi Josh Weinberg with us. We hope that you'll check that out. But we're here for you, locally, to talk through whatever questions or concerns that you have. Talk to us. We know Israel from the inside. We're here for you. But I also ask that you take one more step. I want you to send a thank you. Send a thank you to our elected officials, those who have stood with Israel for a long time, those who have made sure that Israel has the ability to defend herself. Without the Iron Dome system, things would look tremendously different. We'd be having a much different conversation. And if that means crossing party lines, well, then do it. Israel is a bipartisan issue. President Biden deserves credit for emphasizing that Israel has a right to defend itself. Any country does. Thank him for that. Representative Kathy Manning, she has been a paragon of Jewish leadership, but she has also spoken strongly now that she is in Congress in defense of Israel. Thank her for that. But the same should also be said for Representative Ted Budd and our two senators from North Carolina, Senator Richard Burr, as well as Senator Tom Tillis. Email their offices. Call the Capitol switchboard and ask to speak to their offices and leave a message. Do that. It may be one of the most tangible ways for us to support Israel in this, an hour of peril. Beyond that, and I mean this with all my heart, now is the time for us to contact our friends and family in Israel. If you know somebody there, do it. Because I'll tell you this, if someone you knew was in the hospital not feeling well, you'd check in on them, wouldn't you? No one wants to feel alone. When we say that we Jewish people are Am Echad im Lev Echad, that we Jews are one people with one heart, what does it mean if we don't care for one another, especially in times of war? We can reach out. Did you keep the email or contact information of a tour guide, a camp counselor, a friend from way back when, an Israeli that you've hosted? Drop them a note. Do that if you haven't already done so. They'd love to hear from you. And let others over there know that you are thinking of them. Finally, it's at times like this that I'm reminded of the Hebrew words af al pi chen, which translated in English means despite it all or nevertheless. By the way, that was one of the ships. I think you taught me this. That was the name of one of the ships bringing Jewish refugees to the land of Israel in the most unbelievably difficult times, breaking blockades. Af al pi chen. Nevertheless, despite it all, these are tough times. Af al pi chen. Despite it all, friends, I'm hopeful. Af al pi chen. Despite it all, tonight I am lifting up prayers of peace and hope. We're going to do so together in just a moment of prayer for the state of Israel. Af al pi chen, despite it all, I believe that one day, I truly believe this, that one day the descendants of Abraham, our people, the descendants of Isaac, as well as the descendants of Ishmael, throughout the Arab world, throughout the Muslim world, that we will one day reconcile, that we will one day do what most of Israel has done for so long, which is to live in peace, one another as neighbors seeking out understanding. Not the Hamas model, but the model that Israel brings forward. The promise, Af al pi chen, despite it all, Hatikva. This is a time that we should be hopeful. This is not going to happen, peace, by shooting rockets. It's not going to happen by gangs going through the streets. Instead, it's going to happen when those rockets stop. When those who might otherwise choose hatred choose to see the good, the lev, the heart in one another. Ken Yehi Ratzon, made that vision come to us soon, speedily, in the coming hours, if not in the coming days. May this be God's blessing. May the Shabbat and our days ahead be filled with shalom, with connection, with fullness, with peace. Together, let's all say, Amen. Shabbat shalom.